Number 10. Christian Kit Martin. Christian Kit Martin enjoyed a 30-year career as an Army major before he went on to become a private commercial airline pilot. But his decades-long success was cut short in late 2019 when he was arrested at an airport in Kentucky for allegedly murdering 3 of his neighbors. It all started in 2015. Martin was going through a bitter divorce from his ex-wife, Joan. Their neighbor, Calvin Phillips, was helping Joan move her things out of the former couple's shared home when they found some classified military information and other incriminating materials that landed Martin in a court-martial hearing. Phillips was slated to testify as a witness at the hearing, but it never happened because he turned up dead with multiple gunshot wounds, along with his wife Pamela and a third neighbor, Edward Dancero. Martin was discharged from the Army and started a new life as an American Airlines pilot. Meanwhile, the triple murder case went cold. New evidence eventually came to light and investigators reopened the case. This time, their findings led them to Martin, who's now spending the rest of his life behind bars for killing his 3 neighbors in an attempt to cover up his past crimes. He was also convicted on 2 counts of first-degree burglary, 2 counts of arson, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, and criminal attempt to commit arson. Number 9. William Thomas. Disturbing video footage that was leaked in 2019 showed what looked like a pilot spitting and fighting with a female employee on a jet bridge at Denver International Airport. The pilot, William Thomas, appeared to start the confrontation, to which the woman, named Marisha Sporer, responded by slapping him. He then proceeded to punch her repeatedly in the face and stomach. The footage sparked widespread concerns about the employee's conduct. Their employer, a regional airline known as Republic Airways, quickly reassured the public that there were no passengers on the plane at the time, and that both the pilot and his co-worker were fired following the incident. But that wasn't the end of it. The spat caught the attention of the police, who opened an investigation into the violence, which reportedly took place during a layover. It eventually came to light that the pair had been involved in an intimate relationship, and that Sporer reportedly saw something that upset her on Thomas's phone. They agreed to part ways, but apparently couldn't fully let go enough to keep things professional. Unfortunately for both, they decided to sort it out in the worst place imaginable, at work. They were charged with assault and disturbing the peace, and had to answer to the law in addition to losing their jobs. Number 8. Andrew McIntosh. Andrew McIntosh was a pilot with the Netherlands and Belgian-based company TUI Airways. In 2018, the 54-year-old and his 56-year-old soon-to-be ex-wife Patricia were trying to sell their home in the English village of Nightcote, but couldn't find a buyer. When Andrew suggested lowering the asking price on the £300,000 house, Patricia refused. It sent him into a rage, and he proceeded to punch and kick his wife, then beat her to death with a frying pan. He then confessed to the gruesome act to a friend via text message, and the friend contacted the authorities, who proceeded to arrest McIntosh. Andrew admitted to killing Patricia, but denied committing murder based on diminished responsibility. In other words, he argued that mental illness, in his case depression, caused him to act in a way that he normally wouldn't have if he were in his right mind. In his own words, he lost control. But the court didn't buy his explanation. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 17 years. The sentence came as good news to Patricia's family, who expressed their disappointment that McIntosh forced them to endure a trial instead of pleading guilty to the allegations against him. Number 7. Clayton Osbon. It's scary enough to be on a flight where a fellow passenger begins acting erratically, but it's exponentially more terrifying when the pilot has a meltdown in midair. This is what one group of unfortunate travelers learned during a JetBlue flight in 2012. During the trip from New York to Las Vegas, Captain Clayton Osbon allegedly began hitting random buttons and telling air traffic controllers to quieten down. He reportedly spoke nonsensically to First Officer Jason Dowd, saying that they needed to take a leap of faith, that things don't matter, and that we're not going to Vegas. He then started rambling about religion, turned the communications radio off, and dimmed the equipment monitors. Co-pilot Dowd cleverly tricked Osbon into going into the passenger compartment, then locked the cockpit door and changed the code. When Osbon couldn't get back in, he told passengers to say their prayers and ran down the aisle ranting about Jesus and Al-Qaeda. Thankfully, he was subdued by passengers, who tied him up with seatbelt extenders. In the meantime, Dowd manned the aircraft with the help of an off-duty pilot. The flight was diverted to Amarillo, Texas, where it landed safely. OSBON had worked for JetBlue for 12 years leading up to the incident. He had shown up unusually late for the flight that day. He was suspended from his job and charged with interference with the flight crew, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Court documents alleged that the brief psychotic episode was triggered by a lack of sleep. OSBON sued JetBlue for not recognizing that he was mentally ill and blamed the company for endangering the lives aboard Flight 191. And it's certainly true that the case highlighted the need to perform regular mental health checks on anyone who has people's lives in their hands as daily part of their job. Number 6. Thomas Cloyd and Christopher Hughes. The United States Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, bans pilots from drinking less than 8 hours before flying, and some airlines have even stricter standards. Apparently, none of that mattered to pilots Thomas Cloyd and Christopher Hughes, who went out drinking in Miami one night in 2002, when they knew they had to catch an early flight to Phoenix the next morning. Employees at the bar they were drinking at finally kicked the pair out close to 5 a.m. They arrived back at their hotel a half-hour later and caught a shuttle to the airport just 4 hours after that. Cloyd reportedly acted belligerent as soon as he arrived at the airport. He refused to throw his coffee away when security instructed him to do so. He finally complied when the police were called. Staff members smelled alcohol in Cloyd's breath, but he denied that he had been drinking. The plane had already been pulled to the runway when police arrived to arrest the disorderly pilot and his co-pilot. TSA staff called the aircraft back to the terminal, where breathalyzers revealed that Cloyd's blood alcohol content was 0.091. Meanwhile, Hughes blew 0.084. Both were well above the FAA's limit of 0.04. Their careers were effectively over by then, and investigators soon found out that Cloyd had 2 prior arrests for alcohol-related offenses that he never told his employer about. The case bounced back and forth between state and federal court before ultimately landing in the state of Florida's jurisdiction. Cloyd and Hughes tried but failed to get the case thrown out and were respectively sentenced to 5 years and 2.5 years in prison. Number 5. Andreas LUBITZ. On March 24, 2015, an Airbus A320 passenger aircraft flying under the Germanwings budget airline crashed into the French Alps while traveling from Barcelona to Dusseldorf. It was the first fatal crash in the company's 18-year history, killing all 144 passengers and 6 crew members, and the 3rd deadliest French air disaster of all time. The impact was so intense that the plane literally disintegrated. The biggest piece of wreckage was roughly the size of a car. Thankfully, the flight data recorder was still found intact, enabling detectives to piece together the events leading up to the tragedy. An investigation into the tragedy concluded that the co-pilot, Andreas LUBITZ, had flown the plane into the mountainside deliberately. At some point, Captain Patrick Sonderheimer left the cockpit, possibly to use the bathroom. LUBITZ locked himself inside the cockpit alone and ignored Sonderheimer when he began banging on the door from the outside. He also refused to answer questions from air traffic control and didn't transmit a distress signal. He could be heard on the cockpit voice recording breathing steadily. Screaming passengers could also be heard during the final moments. Investigators discovered that LUBITZ actually had a long history of being suicidal, and that he was even denied a U.S. pilot's license due to his past with mental health issues, which he failed to disclose to his employer. In the few days before the crash, he had researched ways to take his own life. Sadly, privacy laws had prevented LUBITZ's doctor from warning Germanwings about his past mental health struggles, leading many to call for legal reforms that would allow doctors to break confidentiality under certain circumstances. Number 4. Steven Silver. On January 19, 1988, a small twin turboprop aircraft crashed a few miles outside Durango La Plata County Airport as it approached for landing. It was flying a regularly scheduled regional route from Denver to Durango via Trans-Colorado Airlines when things went horribly wrong. After descending at 3 times the recommended rate for the approach, the plane struck the ground, then pitched up and rolled several times before hitting the ground and screeching to a stop. 9 of the 17 people aboard died, including Captain Steven Silver. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, investigated the accident and found that First Officer Ralph Harvey had a history of alcohol and substance abuse, but he was found to be drug and alcohol-free at the time of the crash. At some point during the investigation, a pilot who wasn't involved in the wreck told the NTSB that a woman had approached him claiming to be Captain Silver's fiancée. She reportedly said that she and Captain Silver had used a bag of cocaine together the night before the accident. This left officials wanting to dig deeper. The NTSB never got in contact with the woman, but her claims were confirmed by traces of cocaine that were eventually found in Silver's blood and urine. The evidence suggested that the captain used cocaine between 12 and 18 hours before the flight, and that his drug use probably affected his judgment and flying skills. While the nature of the plane's descent is what ultimately caused the crash, this was the first time that a pilot's cocaine use was cited as a contributing factor in an accident that killed passengers. Number 3. James Fritzen Taylor. Southwest Airlines pilot James Fritzen Taylor didn't go to work expecting to make national headlines in June 2011, but that's what happened. He went on an insulting and hate-filled rant that was, unfortunately for him, overheard by air traffic control. He didn't realize he was being recorded when he erupted into a tirade over his dissatisfaction with the appearances of the flight crews he recently worked with. The disturbing diatribe was filled with offensive anti-gay remarks and comments about people's weight and age. During the verbal onslaught, which came during a discussion with coworkers about plans to party together, Taylor specifically identified Houston, Texas, for allegedly having the least attractive group of Southwest employees across the nation. A recording of the diatribe went viral, and at first, nobody knew who the pilot in question was. Taylor came forward and identified himself as the man behind the cringeworthy rant and issued an apology after being suspended without pay. In it, he wrote that he deeply regretted his words and understood that he needed to be more sensitive and tolerant. Not everyone was satisfied with Taylor's apology, but it was apparently good enough for his employer. Surprisingly, he didn't lose his job and was instead required to attend diversity training. Number 2. Saiful Salam. Shortly after being caught in his hotel room with methamphetamine in 2012, Lion Air pilot Saiful Salam tested positive for having the drug in his system. It happened just 3 hours before he was scheduled to fly and was the latest among a slew of similar incidents among Indonesian pilots. The incident reflected a widespread and growing problem with methamphetamine abuse among airline employees. In fact, another pilot who was previously arrested for possession had tipped the authorities off to Salam also being a user. The problem was that there were not enough commercial pilots throughout Indonesia, as well as the rapid growth of Lion Air and other airlines. The country's middle class was growing, which meant there were more people booking flights. The airlines simply weren't prepared to keep up with the demand. Number 1. Parminder KAUR GULATI. Parminder KAUR GULATI received her pilot's wings in 2011, but it would be inaccurate to say that she actually earned them. After executing a bumpy landing at one airport and somehow failing to raise the alarm about her credentials, Gulati touched a plane down nose first at Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport. She was extremely lucky that her faulty moves didn't kill or seriously harm anyone aboard, and her rookie errors caught the attention of India's flight authorities. A closer look at Gulati's qualifications, or in her case, lack thereof, showed that she had forged the necessary documents to obtain a pilot's license. But as it turned out, forged pilot licenses were nothing new in India, where candidates are known for exaggerating their number of training hours and falsifying documents in other ways. The practice has become increasingly common as people seek to bypass the requirements in order to land high-salary jobs. The incident with Gulati and several others where people were suspected of faking their credentials prompted the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, to review thousands of pilots' licenses. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be on a flight with an erratic passenger or delayed at the airport for 12 hours? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!